AAA Live! AAA Live! AAA Live!
Ang palatuntunang maghahatid sa inyo ng kaalaman sa edukasyon upang magbigay liwanag at gabay sa ating mga mag-aaral at magulang.
Where your academic goals will be advanced and achieved. AAA Live!
Lilinang ng inyong talento at huhubog ng inyong husay upang magtagumpay sa karerang tatahakin.
AAA Live!
At ngayon, narito ang guro ng bayan, Attorney AMIHAN April ALCAZAR.
Good evening to our viewers. This is Attorney AMIHAN April ALCAZAR. This is AAA Live, where your academic goals are advanced and achieved. We are airing every Wednesdays from 7 to 8 in the evening on Katipunan channel. So please like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube and Facebook channels. So for tonight, we are joined, and it is such a privilege for us to be joined tonight by Assistant Attorney General Wenona Baldenegro of Arizona, and she's representing the Pascua Yaqui tribe. So maybe you can give our viewers some greetings from Arizona, both in your native language and from your state of Arizona. So Assistant Attorney General, please.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here with all of you. Again, my name is Wenona Baldenegro. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. My people live in the northeastern corner of the state of Arizona, and our reservation also goes into the state of New Mexico, the state of Utah, and we cover what's called the Four Corners in the Southwest United States. In my native language, we usually introduce ourselves by our clans. Sheya Wenona Benali and Chia. Tena Jini Nishlin, do Hanatni Bashchi, Patna Satni Dashiche, do Trabahan Dashna. Put ego as Stanishlin. I'm of the Darkwood Street people, born for the one who walks around clan, and on my maternal mother's side of my family, I am near the water's edge of the near the water's edge people, and on my paternal side, grandfather's side, I am which means those who walk around. So those are my clans in my Navajo language.
Yes, thank you so much for informing us of your origins, and of course, you are descendants from the state of Arizona. So I think it's so interesting for us to begin our conversation tonight by really talking about like how you started to have this interest as a young person, because we'll be talking about the indigenous community in general, and then of course your particular Navajo Nation, and how and when as a young person did you develop the interest for the protection of the indigenous community and eventually went into the legal field. So maybe you can tell us a little bit of your historical perspective from both a personal and also from your people's perspective. Wenona?
Sure. Well, I'm an attorney by profession, and as I reflected on my educational experience growing up on the Navajo reservation, I have a distinct memory of the moment in which I decided that I wanted to go to law school and become an attorney. And that actually happened very early on for me, as early as high school. And what prompted me to pursue a career in the legal field actually ties into my own family history and some of the tragic events that have taken place, not only for my tribe in the United States, but it happened to a lot of many different Indian tribes throughout the United States. When I was in elementary school, I learned for the first time the history of my people, the Navajo people, and our forced removal from our ancestral homelands. And at the time, I was too young to understand the direct connection to my family history. And in large part because, just being young, you don't quite understand the times. You think that everything happened in the ancient past.
Yes.
And, coupled with the fact that my family at the time, my parents, my grandparents, decided not to tell me my full history, our family history, until later on when I was a student in high school. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I had learned for the first time that the forced removal of our people from our homelands, that my great-grandfather had been part of that forced removal and actually survived and returned home to our reservation. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, it was the fact that my mother was alive, or my great-grandfather was alive at the time that my mother was a young girl. So my mother knew my great-grandfather, this older gentleman who had experienced this horrific event in our history and had survived. And, unfortunately, it was taboo, as it is in many cultures and, many communities across the world, that when you experience such a tragic event, it becomes taboo to talk about. So she didn't know the stories of his survival, but my grandfather, he had told my grandfather at a later time in life what those stories were, and those stories were handed down to me and my siblings, and I it was a very eye-opening experience for me to know that the events that I had read in our history books and that I had learned in school, that I actually had a personal family history to tell. And that actually inspired me to learn more about really, how could this happen? How could this happen to my family? How could this happen to our people? How do these sort of events occur, to a large group of people? Yes. And of course, that prompted me to learn about the law. It prompted me to learn about the government. And that's when I had sort of, in my educational experience, in my learning experience, I had understood that there was a connection to the law. Yeah. And I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in law, in large part because I didn't want this to happen again to our people and certainly other people across the country.
Yes. So maybe we can backtrack a little and talk about like the role of education in that informing you about your decision, because you talked about the Navajo Nation and the Indians, American reservations. And so insofar as the education and the educational system was concerned, because you said you only in high school found out about the history from personal accounts of your family members. So how did you think was the role of education all throughout the time that you were growing up, when you did not have information about the history, both of your people and your personal history of the accounts of what had happened to your family?
Well, certainly the educational system has changed even in my lifetime, certainly within the school system located on our reservation. Many people are now becoming familiar with what is known as the boarding schools, the boarding school system in the United States and in Canada. And my generation, we're sort of the tail end of that system, that educational system that existed within many Indian tribal nations in the United States, and certainly First Nations people in Canada. But even the boarding school system had changed dramatically by the time, I certainly was in school. I did attend a boarding school on my reservation when I was very young. But again, my experience is very much different from my mother's experience, is different from my grandmother's experience. Certainly my grandmother, for example, was part of that generation who experienced, again, some of the tragic events that occurred within these boarding schools, very much different. By the time I had gone through the boarding school system when I was young, the United States government had transformed the educational system such that we were permitted to finally learn our language and start to learn a little bit of our history. And there were more, the curriculum incorporated a lot more of our traditional values and beliefs and oral traditions. But going back again to my early experience, I made the transition from our boarding school system into a public school system, which was run by the state of Arizona.
Was this in high school?
Actually, this started in elementary school. So we call it the primary school, from preschool on up to second grade. And then from third grade on is, elementary and, junior high and high school. But the public school system existed for us from third grade on.
Okay.
But, that because the schools were run by the state of Arizona, by the state government, they didn't incorporate any of, Navajo language. Certainly didn't learn very much at all about Navajo culture, Navajo traditions. That learning had to take place at home, unfortunately. And for a lot of students who didn't have access to grandparents or parents who spoke the language or knew those traditions, sadly, many of them didn't pick up the language and don't speak the language, sadly. I had learned about our history in school only because I had a teacher who went out of their way to make sure that in teaching us, for example, in our history classes, that while we were learning about United States history, that she went to go find books and articles wherever she could to incorporate Navajo history.
Yes.
And so it wasn't part of the state curriculum in our schools to have Navajo history. It really took my teacher going out and doing extra research on her own to find that information and make sure that we learned about our own history. That was my experience growing up. It just wasn't something taught to us. It wasn't taught in all the classes.
Yeah, because the state of Arizona, in fact, is home to many tribes, as you said, and nations of the indigenous community in the United States. And the fact that the American public educational institutions in the state itself did not incorporate it in the curriculum, did it create a kind of alienation from that part of your identity during your formative years?
Yes and no. I was very fortunate that I had teachers who made the extra effort to make sure that I had learned my own history. But I know that wasn't the case for other teachers who taught the same subjects within other courses in our high school. They decided to stay with the strict curriculum that was given by the state of Arizona. And unfortunately, a lot of my classmates at the time didn't learn the same history, didn't have the same history books that we did. I don't know what my experience would have been had I not learned about Navajo history. I mean, that's a very interesting thought, as to whether I would have gone down the same path,
Yes, exactly.
profession, if I hadn't learned about my own history.
Yes.
But I will say that it prompted more questions than answers for me, because I did start to notice a difference in certainly the textbooks. What textbooks that I later had, even going into college, that mentioned Native Americans always mentioned Native Americans, on the plains. Like there was information about the Lakota people or the Cherokees in Oklahoma, the Trail of Tears, for example. There was never any mention of my tribe or any other tribes across the United States. And that really perplexed me. I didn't understand, finishing my educational path. Why is it that I was learning only about certain tribes and their history, but never about mine?
Yes. So I think those kinds of experiential learning, how then did it guide you to develop the skills and competencies that eventually led you to study, of course, as you've mentioned, the field of law in general, and then eventually indigenous law?
Well, what's interesting, I find interesting about myself now is that I'm still learning, even at this stage in my career, the importance of having had learned that early history of my tribe, learning essentially what it means for me to incorporate into the work that I do now, my own beliefs, my own values about, really all aspects of life, and certainly the issues that are taking place now. It's been a learning process the entire time for me to figure that out, because it's not quite apparent, to most, I would think, most Native people, Indigenous people, because going through certainly college and then on to law school, there was always, I felt, this, I don't know how to describe it, but every time that I tried to insert my perspective, as a Navajo woman growing up on the Navajo reservation, my comments were always pushed aside, or I have a distinct experience and memory of my first, days in law school and property class, where we started talking about this concept of land rights and how the United States came to develop the property rights system in the United States. And it started right at the period of, when the United States signed its declaration and, the Indian Wars, and very much glossed over the fact that Indigenous people were here first. And how is it that my people, for example, we went from having these recognized rights, and all of a sudden, from the next day, from one day to the next, my people were like citizens of Mexico at one point, or Spain, or and then of course the United States. And I remember asking this question of my professor, and his response to me was, well, Wenona, if you want to learn about the history of Indigenous peoples, this is not the class. Go across campus, go take a history class.
Yes.
But this is not the class for this discussion. That was the sort of responses that I would always get from my professors anytime I would bring up a topic. about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous rights.
Yes. So we're talking about glossing over like history and of course what may have been included or deleted in history books, as you've mentioned. So what then prompted you, as you've mentioned, there was an interest that was developing you of, yes, you don't want to actually have these experiences that your forebears had experienced. And one way to do that is to be knowledgeable about the law. But the law that you've studied, I'm sure, is based on the Anglo-Saxon concept of a legal system. So how then did all of these experiential learning skills and competencies then now play into the eventual career trajectory that you pursued eventually? As you said, that's an interesting thought that if you had not learned about your people during your formative years, what could have eventually happened both to your personal and professional life? Wenona?
Well, upon graduating from law school, I had decided to practice law right away, and in trying to effectuate change, within certainly my community, but really with Indian tribes across the nation, I again had sort of another epiphany and realized, well, most of the laws that are on the books that have a adverse impact on our people
Yes.
are adopted by governmental bodies like the United States Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And that again prompted me to sort of take a different direction in my career, and I decided to pursue politics.
Yes.
And I decided to run for Congress one year. Unfortunately, didn't win my race at the time, but what it led to was I ran for a position within the Arizona legislature, and I did win that election and served in the Arizona legislature as a state representative, representing a district that included 9 of the 22 Indian tribes in Arizona. And so I, having served in the Arizona legislature, I felt that I was in a much better position as an elected official versus being an attorney on the outside to bring about change in our tribal communities through legislation. And so I worked with certainly all of the tribes in our district, excuse me, and actually worked with all 22 Indian tribes across the state to introduce legislation to correct some of the changes that needed to be made in our healthcare system, for example. I actually am the original author of a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women bill that has now passed through the Arizona legislature. It's the first of its kind. So I've learned that those skills that I've had and I developed as an attorney and even through law school served me very well in the legislature, because then I could, draft legislation and introduce legislation and bring about the change that I wanted to see in our communities.
I see. So from the legislature, of course, so now you're going to be on the other end of like practice, in the sense of like you talk about like prosecutions and you talk about like cases. So how has that part of your career been very much different or similar to what you've been doing as a lawmaker in the state legislature?
Well, now having gone back to being an attorney, I served out my term and decided not to run again and returned back to the legal field. It's been an incredible experience for me. I feel like I'm well-rounded. I'm now focused, most of my work is focused on the federal level. We are, I returned to the legal profession deciding to work in the health sector, which is a new field for me. It was not a field that I worked in previously before running for office, but because of the work I had done in the legislature, working on healthcare, I ended up becoming a healthcare attorney. And I became an attorney, healthcare. I made the switch back into the field at a very difficult time, because I literally was working as a healthcare attorney for about 6 months before the pandemic started. And last year has just been an incredible learning experience for me. I've had to learn on the go and learn really with everybody else as well. And really, a lot of my focus wasn't necessarily on legal work per se, but really on policies and learning about public health and public health emergencies and preparedness, and helping the tribe that I work for now, the Pascua Yaqui tribe, ensure that they saved lives essentially last year, and I got the necessary vaccines that were needed, and continued to protect the community members from the virus. And so that, again, that essentially was an absolutely eye-opening experience for me to have both the law, the policy, and legal aspects of my skill base come together like that.
So, having talked about mostly, of course, about the professional skills that you were able to use in your particular career, what then do you think would be the personal qualities that young people should develop, and specifically if they were members of the Indigenous community, if they wanted to be in your field and in your career?
Well, I first and foremost, one thing I've learned over the years is, figure out what it is that you love to do, that you're passionate about, and stick with it, pursue it. I certainly, my field, it can be stressful. It's not always a job. It's not a 8 to 5 job. I work a lot of long hours at various times, and certainly did last year. But I really encourage, anytime I get an opportunity to talk to young people, is that when you're thinking about your educational futures, your path, educational careers, that to not be guided by, the financial wealth, or even the fame, if you will, of a certain career, because that's not going to make you happy down the road. That you really have to figure out what it is that inspires you, what motivates you, and go do it. It's just so crucially important that young people nowadays, really focus their time and their effort and their educational experience to go and do the things that they love to do. Because in the end, it makes you, your life is so much better. Your health, your mental stability, your overall physical well-being is much more important.
Yeah. So I think we've come a little bit full circle into your educational journey, and of course, how that has informed you in terms of your personal and professional development. So, of course, in the end, because we have many young people who are going to be listening to us, what then of the advice and insight can you give to the young people who are now on the cusp of making decisions, both for their personal and professional future, about the factors that they should be considering when they really make these life-changing decisions?
One important one thing that I did when I knew that I wanted to go to law school and I wanted to succeed in my educational experience, is that I sought out those people who I knew could help me reach my educational goals. I made sure that I had many mentors throughout my educational experience. And I also made sure that I sought out people who could help me both mentor me in terms of my career choices, but also in my courses.
Mhm.
I graduated summa cum laude from the Arizona State University. I graduated from the Honors College there and went on to Harvard Law School. And, I used to get a lot of students ask me, like, how did you do that? How did you get there? What did you do to prepare? And
Yes.
one thing that I had learned early on when I was in school is that never be afraid to ask for help, ever. I had so many tutors in college. I spent numerous hours after class studying, meeting with tutors, spending a lot of that time preparing and improving my skills. Right? I always thought that I was never a strong writer, and I spent a lot of time with tutors writing and rewriting my essays and my papers, and just continuing over a period of the 4 years I was in college, improving those skills so that I could finally be able to apply to a school like Harvard and be admitted. And so I just, hard work and just persevere and just stick to it. And I know some folks it's hard to move away from home, away from family.
Mhm.
And, the other important thing is to seek out those support systems around you and, and make sure to find those individuals who are invested in your success.
Yeah, well, it's been such a pleasure, definitely, to have this discussion and insights from your end. So I think maybe you can give like a few words of support and encouragement, firstly to the young people who are listening to us, also to the members of the Indigenous community whom you advocate for, and definitely, of course, the kind of insight that we would like to listen to as part of humanity. We in the Philippines also have our own indigenous communities who comprise now the minorities, and there's a lot of struggle that they also have to undertake for the protection of their rights in our country. Wenona?
For all the young folks out there, I'm just always truly inspired by all the wonderful work that many of the young people are engaged in at this time. So many young people are leading the way in terms of some of the really pressing issues that we're facing in our lifetime. And I would really hope that as young people that you continue to be passionate about what you're doing, about what you believe in, and continue to work hard and pursue your dreams and don't ever give up. It gets hard at various times. There's obstacles you face, but so long as you keep your eye on the prize and keep pushing forward and reaching for your dreams, you will get there.
Yes.
And when it comes to the Indigenous communities across the world, I just, again, we're facing unprecedented times right now, and climate change is such a big issue for the entire world, for all global communities. And I truly believe that as Indigenous people, the knowledge that we hold will serve its purpose. And I really feel that, our communities will rise to the forefront and will be the ones to in my heart, I hope that we will be the ones to help save this planet and that we will all be here for future generations to come.
Well, it's been such a wonderful discussion, Wenona. So we look forward to meeting very soon, I hope, when you do have the opportunity to join us and join with your brothers and sisters from the other side of the state. And I'm so looking forward, if we can, to meet each other again.
Yes, likewise.
Thank you so much. So, and we'll be right back. We're back here at AAA Live. This is Attorney AMIHAN April ALCAZAR, where your academic goals are advanced and achieved. Still here at the University of Tennessee Martin, so we'll be talking about our student from the Philippines who actually studied here at the University of Tennessee Martin and was able to graduate with his bachelor's in international relations. So let us all welcome Mr. Adrian de Sagun. Good evening, Adrian. How are you today?
I'm good. Good evening. I'm good.
Yes. So maybe you can give our viewers who are mostly from the education sector, our students, parents, faculty members, administrators, and stakeholders in the education sector, some greetings from where you are currently.
So I'm currently in Alabama. I recently moved here because of a job offer that has been extended to me. And so far, the weather's been so-so.
Yes, very interesting. Okay. So I think we will have a very interesting discussion tonight, Adrian. So first and foremost, we would like to know, as a young person, what sort of interest did you have, and how and when did you eventually decide that you wanted to pursue the field that you are currently in, which is international relations?
So basically, the only reason I actually considered taking relations was because major aspects of political science and internationalism involved. And as in the Japanese culture, I figured that this was a good opportunity for me to be able to study that culture and something that would be in line with my career. Another thing was back when I was in high school, my interest in politics really started to grow, and I thought that maybe in college I could either do science or. But in all honesty, back in high school, one of the major factors that I really considered when I was gonna major was, um, no math as much. I, I realized that that's something that you can't avoid, and so I ended up with international relations just because it's something that fits perfectly with what I wanted to do in the future.
Yes. So maybe let's talk about a little bit about your experiential learnings that you had here in the United States. So how would you differentiate the educational system that you had experienced previously in the Philippines, and now, of course, you had this American college experience? What were like the differences and the similarities?
Um, I think the biggest is that I noticed immediately was the fact that you were able to choose our own classes at which times and at which days. And another one was we are strictly only coming into school during the day, wherein in the Philippines, there are also times that we have to come in on the weekends to attend classes.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the that I immediately. The second thing was, the uniform. Because
Yeah.
before I moved here to the United States, I actually took one semester of college at US, and so it feels like I'm transitioning immediately from like a Philippine university to
Uh-huh.
a American university, which was a culture shock. So
Yes, for you.
yes, just because personally I feel like college system here in the United States is like students are being fed with information. Because one of the things that I noticed was every time we're supposed to have an exam or if we have an upcoming exam, our professors give us like these study guides, which are
Uh-huh.
a bit detailed and tell you what exactly you need to study, where what you need to. However, in the field, most of the professors would just give you a very vague, assignment like, okay,
Uh-huh.
read chapters 1 to 3.
Yes.
Everything you read will be in the exam.
Okay.
So comparing to, I feel like there's a little bit more challenge when it comes to studying back in the field.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I also noticed was the flexibility of uh, especially the system. Wherein in the Philippines, you know, before you enroll in the university that you want, you have to decide, what major course you're going to be taking for
Yes.
years. And what surprised me here is there's option for us to
Mm.
remain undecided up until sophomore year, and before we enter our junior, we should be able to have a decision what kind of major, course we will be taking for the next years. And what's great about it allows you to take the basic and general classes, the
Mhm.
requirements for graduation, while thinking about something that you would actually want to do. And it gives the student the opportunity to figure out for themselves
Mm.
what kind of career or what kind of path they would want to take the
Yeah.
future they graduate. So that's one of the biggest differences between the two. And similarities, personally, I don't think there are any, just because
Yeah.
yeah, it's a completely different culture itself. Although there are some influences that the American education system has in the Philippine education system, but the way that those two diverged from how it was passed on in the Philippines,
Yes.
it's a different culture in its own.
Altogether. So maybe you can also tell us a little bit, Adrian, about your experience specifically in the University of Tennessee in Martin, because I'm sure there are not as many foreign students in the university as in comparison to like other places in the United States. And from what I understood, you would probably be like one, if not the only one Filipino in like your contemporaries in that particular university. So how did that play out in terms of like your experience in college?
Basically, whenever I started at Martin, I expected for the university to have a set of students, especially when it comes to international students.
Yes.
But to my surprise,
Yes.
the university has their own national program. We had several students from Saudi Arabia, from
Yeah.
Japan, Korea, Taiwan,
Uh-huh.
of course, Germany, France. all that stuff. So refreshing, but it was refreshing at the same time. And of course,
Yeah.
like you said, I'm the only Filipino
Yeah.
in that university, and it was a little bit lonely just because I've been in the United States for like 3 years before I started at UT Martin, and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody that's close to my age. Mostly everybody that I was taking classes with were younger than me.
Yeah.
A bit lonely at times. Hard for me,
Yes.
you know, catch like the conversations or like the jokes or cultural references just because I didn't grow up in here. And
Yes.
what they're talking about, that they known in their childhood or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like I said, we did have a good number of international students at the beginning, but unfortunately, as the years went on, that number started declining.
Yeah.
We did retain several students from our partner different countries, um, Korea, Japan, Saudi students, because of the scholarships that their government was offering.
Yeah.
And so, although it was like a really diverse group, there started exacerbated, by the fact that of the U.S. administration in 2016, which kind of led to other countries a little bit more hesitant,
Yes.
send their students. Of
Yeah.
course, there are costs like English learning here in the States, wherein South Asian countries were going to the Philippines or others, which has a lot cheaper alternative than going that expensive, especially like national.
I see. So I think, Adrian, you were talking about now the kind of skills and proficiencies that you have developed so far, insofar as surviving like university life in an American university. So, what do you think are those essential competencies that you need to develop that aided you in your college years there at the University of Tennessee in Martin, and now you're hoping that it will also guide you in your career here in the United States?
Yeah. Of course, like you said, first thing that you need to do is survival,
Yeah.
especially if you're the only one
Yes.
from a different country at university.
Yes.
And second of all, you need to be really open and start building a network of connections, especially on your first years in that college that you're at.
Yes.
A lot of people can the short run, but also the long run. One of the things that my advisor told me, you know, knowing different professors early on could help you in the future, especially when you're looking for internships or like shadowing opportunities or for research or recommendations. So,
Yeah.
well, that's one of the things that, that's really important, especially starting and being able to have a network would not help you. I'm sorry, would not only help you as a student, but would also help you for professional career.
Exactly.
But
Yes.
anybody that, referred it could just always come back to that professor. Or if you have a question or anything you want to know in specific fields or areas, might need recommendations on those professional people that you could come back to and favors to or favors of. And another thing was like you need to be really friendly and approachable. Uh,
Uh-huh.
before I
But
came,
Filipinos are very friendly, don't you think so?
uh, it's a natural trait for us, but I kind of grew up like differently just because back in high school I wasn't really the one to join extracurricular. I
Okay.
wasn't that kind of person that would put myself in front of others,
Uh-huh.
give speeches in front of others. I'm so nervous. I just feel ashamed, and that's something that I realized, the hard way again
Okay.
being here in the United States, because the more forward, determined, and confident you, it attracts a lot of people that can grow not just on a personal level, but on a professional level. How I met a lot of my friends, because I was able to express my interests, and I was my opinions on certain subjects. That's how I ended up meeting, the people that would eventually help me with, the extracurriculars that I was involved with during my junior and my senior year at UT Martin.
Okay, that's great. You also mentioned about joining the international exchange program and specifically in Japan. So, how did that experience also inform and shape you in the sense that you went to an Asian country and yet that culture is very different from the Philippines and, of course, from the United States?
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's an exchange program. Actually, what preceded, but I actually participated in a 2-week travel study,
Yes.
and it kind of involves introducing us to the culture and the language and people, and so the introductory base of helped me decide, oh, here is an actual exchange program where I would be there a year or so, to study the language and culture. And so, like you mentioned, like being an Asian, like originally, and then to the United States,
Yes.
another Asian country, it gives me that unique perspective of seeing things, in a different light. Just
Yes.
because, what what they teach here in the United States regarding Japan,
Yes.
by deviate what we learned in the Philippines. And you can see that, in Japan, they teach certain subjects differently from what is taught in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
Philippines. Although different, basically the same story.
Yeah.
A little bit more tailored to the views of the specific country where it's being taught at.
Yes.
An interesting and a really eye-opening experience, because although everybody in the world operates the same, rules, there are different interpretations for the different country, which is tailored to the culture and, the views, especially the political and religious beliefs of the countries that you're. And
Yeah.
it's an interesting prospect that you would not really see if you're just, you know in your little bubble and not exploring different places and not grabbing the opportunities to see a specific subject in a different light.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna share this real quick. One of the interesting topics that I've learned,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how World War II viewed. Like,
Yes.
we learned that in I learned that from history class here in the United States. And
Yes.
we briefly touched upon it during our cultural in Japan.
Yes.
Being somebody who has to see different perspectives, that you
Mm-hmm.
know opens your eyes, that the Philippines, the United States, and Japan were involved in the same event but are seen in three different perspectives.
Yes, definitely.
That's probably one of the interesting things that I've experienced as an international student
Uh-huh.
to an Asian country, all originally from a South Asian country.
Yes, exactly. Well, I spent almost 7 years in Japan as a scholar of the Japanese Ministry of Education. So that's a very interesting insight that you were immediately able to see. So I think, Adrian, this is what's very important now for our viewers, coming from this very unique experience that you had, as I've mentioned, being in University of Tennessee Martin, being the only Filipino student there, having an American college experience. What takeaway insight insights and advice can you give to our viewers, especially in the Philippines, who might be in the future having this opportunity to come to the United States and probably also have that college experience, or they aspire to have some part of their educational journey spent in the United States?
Um, what I could tell you, when that opportunity arises, grab it immediately. Especially, if once lifetime opportunity, it might not happen again.
Yes.
Because it's an experience that can help you grow not just on a personal level but also in a professional level.
Yeah.
Being somebody who has international experience would be a great asset for you once you're in the workforce, because a lot of employers these days are looking for students or recent graduates that has international experience or background. And now that I'm talking about that subject, like one of the biggest reasons that my employer right now hired me was because of my knowledge and familiarity with Japanese culture and the language, and
Mhm.
it really helped me out. And once I told that to my advisor and my
Yeah.
Japanese professor, they were so glad and thrilled
Yeah.
that my educational background, especially my international exploits,
Yes.
the biggest factor that I was hired for my current job right now.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that I would like to, you know, give as an advice to those
Mm-hmm.
who are hoping or are given in the opportunity in the near future to go to the United States or any other country for that, if there are scholarships or there are any grants that you could, take advantage of, do take advantage of that, because it would help you, especially here in the United States, where cost of living and the cost
Mm-hmm.
rising, for the past years. And so, if you have the opportunity, or if you are able to apply for grants or scholarships, by all means, take advantage of that
Yeah.
and do your research as well. What kind of, like, town or area are you moving into, because depending which area it is, it may be a little bit straightforward, or people
Yes.
really respectful. And that's one hard lesson I learned
Mm.
here in the United States, because I've spent most of my time here in the South, where
Yeah.
people are polite, really. And when I went to Chicago to renew my passport, it was like,
Uh-huh.
like, and they keep on walking, like, okay, that's a whole different experience,
Yes. Yes.
whole different country in itself, even though it's, two different states in one country. So it was a really interesting concept. Like, it's like a culture shock within a culture shock inside a
Yeah.
country that has cultures. And so that's something you really should, do research on, and also find out if there are offers that the university are extending to their students, because at UT Martin, our student government association, they do scholarships for our international travels and
Yes.
any other scholarship that help individual college well, and grants. And that's something that on nothing pops up, you can always ask point person that you're in contact with in the university that you're planning to go in the near future. And basically, the more that you know, the easier it is for you to transition to that new system, to that new culture. And culture shock wouldn't be as bad,
Okay.
not as shocking as as it normally would if you don't do your research ahead of time. A whole complete um, foreign or alien environment that you for. Speaking of that, like the United States, like being a Filipino has English at a very young age, more prevalent in the current generation that we have in the Philippines, that's an asset that you can exploit because not only can you speak American English,
English.
exposed to like American culture, especially through their movies, their music.
Yes.
That's something that would help ease here in the United States if you do. Of course, the rule for that apply well. You get the opportunity to study in different countries other than the United
Yes.
Your research, make sure you know what you and are available for you.
Yeah. Well, Adrian, it's been such a pleasure to have you at our show. I'm sure our viewers had so much appreciated your sharing your experiences here and your exploits in the United States and elsewhere. So we wish you the best of luck in your career, and we hope that we will continue our communication because we would want to touch base again and see how you've been doing after graduating from the University of Tennessee in Martin. So I myself had such a wonderful time here at the university, and so I'm looking forward to developing more initiatives for international exchanges with the UTM and our Filipino higher education institutions. So again, thank you so much. And we, what can you say to our Filipino audience, of course, in Tagalog when you are saying goodbye?
Paano nga ba? I mean, masyado na akong matagal na nasa Pilipinas, so know how to do this process. Ako na rin yung mga work. Pero maraming salamat po sa mga nanonood and hopefully marami po kayong na tips hint about pag-aral abroad ngayon na mahirap pang bumiyahe dahil nga sa COVID, pero hopefully marami kayong aral at impormasyon na nakolekta sa aking experiences dito sa United States. And, I look forward to, being a or tips future. So, yun lang po.
Okay. Thank you so much, Adrian. We really appreciate your time, and we will be in touch with you, okay? Thank you so much. Okay, and goodbye.
AAA Live!
Inyong napakinggan si Attorney AMIHAN April ALCAZAR.
AAA Live!
Naway kinapulutan ninyo ng impormasyon at kaalaman ang talakayan ng mga ekspertong nakapanayam mula sa iba't ibang larangan ng edukasyon.
AAA Live!
Ang AAA Live ay mapakikinggan at mapanonood sa Katipunan Channel tuwing araw ng Miyerkules alas 7 hanggang alas 8 ng gabi.
Where your academic goals will be advanced and achieved. AAA Live!
Hanggang sa muling pagtatanghal.